Hello, everyone. GM. Welcome back to another episode of Overpriced JPEGs. If you hear me laughing and another voice laughing, that's because we've actually already been recording for a few minutes. This is a collab. This is a crossover collab episode between Overpriced JPEGs and The First Mint. So I am joined here by LG, founder of The First Mint. You're looking at me like I said something wrong. Did I say something wrong?
I'm listening to you. I listen actively.
Listen with rapt
I listen
attention.
with my whole face.
Okay. LG, whole face listener, is here with me today. Also founder of The First Mint. We're doing a little cross promotional thing. I don't know, whatever it is, where, you know, this episode we posted on LG's channel. We actually have already been recording for about 40 minutes. That'll be on his channel. We're also going to post this, of course, here where you are listening to it on the Overpriced JPEGs channel. For those of you who have been listening to OPJ religiously, you know it is sports month here at Overpriced JPEGs. February, we are diving into the intersection of sports and blockchain, having cool guests on that touch that intersection in some way. And this is the heart of it. This is not like, you know, kind of fringe touching sports. LG is the heart of sports and the blockchain. The First Mint has been covering sports and the blockchain since the very early days. They do it so well. They do it the best. LG, welcome to Overpriced JPEGs.
Whoa, man. That was such an intro. I'm kind of nervous now because people start listening. They'll be like, oh, I don't know. A heart of sports? Jeez.
No, the heart of sports
so
and
intense.
NFTs. No, come on, relax. But the heart of sports and NFTs.
You're here first, folks. The First Mint is the heart of sports.
No, sports and
Root
NFTs.
over ESPN.
Why are you willfully ignoring me?
No, I love it.
Sports
I love
and
it.
NFTs.
Thank you. No, we're here together. I'm happy for Sports Month. Do you have like a cheer for Sports Month on your channel? Like even when you said it, I was like, there needs to be like a bell that goes off or something, like or a horn, or like vuvuzelas. Remember that?
Oh my gosh, yeah, the World Cup vuvuzelas. I was like, that is so annoying. But of course, like I go to football games, they're like, you know, fuck you, ref. So that's probably annoying too. That's what Americans sound like at sports games. You know what?
You go to South Africa and the sound of sports South Africa. You go to New York, fuck you. Like that's the shit. That's
I guess now is the time to give the warning to everybody listening at home that this is going to be one of those episodes. And if you have kids around, please cover their ears. You know, I will say this, and then we'll dive in. I was in France. I was in Paris during the World Cup. They were so calm. We went to a sports bar for a Parisian sports bar, you know, whatever, showing the World Cup. I swear to God, it was like the way that people in my life would react. We were saying this earlier, like my fiance is a really big Buffalo Bills fan. Like he's never been that calm at any Buffalo Bills. It could be the opener of the season. It could be the least important game of the entire year. They could be sitting the starters and he would still react with more gumption. It was so shocking to me. So anyways, sports cultures in different countries, it all varies.
You know, what I will say, though, is that those French people, they won the last World Cup, right? So they're calm. They're like reigning champions, you know, whereas like,
it doesn't matter.
But your fiance is pain. As a Bills fan, you've only known pain. Yeah. You know, so there's no like confidence, there's no air of confidence like strutting around.
I don't think the Patriots fans still want nuts. There's more to it than that, LG, I'm telling you. There's a culture difference.
I have no doubt at that point as well. You're telling me there's a difference between New Yorkers and Parisians? No way. Get out of here.
Do y'all realize what's happening over at Ledger? That the #1 leader in digital asset security has teamed up with Tony Fadell, builder of the iPod, to revolutionize the experience of owning digital assets securely. They're doing this with Ledger STAX. This is the most premium product to date, and it's so user-friendly. Ledger STAX is a palm-sized device with a new e-Ink 2 display on the cover and around the spine, meaning you can view and confirm transactions at a glance. You can also customize your ledger by displaying your favorite NFT on the cover, even when the device is off. Pair your new Ledger STAX with your Ledger Live to manage, earn, and hodl all your NFTs and over 500 coins. This space needs sleek user experiences, our iPod moment, and that's what Ledger has set out to do here without compromising their core promise of security. Keep your digital assets in the safest place they can be, a Ledger STAX wallet. Trust yourself with Ledger STAX and go to shop.ledger.com to pre-order your Ledger STAX now. They're shipping in April. And if you use the link in our show notes to pre-order now, you'll be helping the show as well. Thank you. Well, we are going to do a couple things here today on this here episode. First, we are going to do a status update. You know, I'm really excited. You know so much about so many parts of this industry, and we're going to just dive into where are we at. Let's get a I'm blanking on the words, but like lay of the land, status check. I also want to talk a little bit more macro, and I want us to take a step back towards the end of this episode and say, what are the big themes in the sports industry writ large, and how do NFTs and Web3 play a role in that or not, or how do these puzzle pieces fit together? But to start, let's start with this status update, the state of the nation in sports and Web3 today. I think there's a few players here that we're going to go through and just take a look at, like, what's the volume like? How has volume shifted? I don't know, LG, if you want to lead this, or if you want me to tee you off with some of the specific platforms we're looking at.
No, I'll tell you all about it, right? So if you're looking for kind of like, what's a snapshot? Like, what is, if you had to carve out all the sports stuff and kind of put it into a corner, what you would notice for sure is that there are two major players, right? There's SoRare and there's Dapper Labs. Those are the two companies that are kind of
that's
like,
what you need to know.
That's what you need. Well, that's what you need to know. And also from a volume perspective, there's them and then there's everybody else. And I will say, before anybody says DraftKings, it's really hard to get DraftKings data. I've asked them to get access to their data. I haven't been able to find a platform that gives you like daily sales volume. So for all I know, DraftKings is up there as well. But for all intents and purposes of this episode, I'm just going to say that we're going to have to exclude them a little bit on the numbers side until we have a bit more clarity from their end. But to give you a sense of volume, and I know in the NFT world, we talk about a lot about volume. It kind of dictates a lot of stuff. In 2022, the volume for SoRare was $341 million. That is secondary and primary volume. They have an auction system, so it kind of gets all wrapped into one thing. I've tried to separate those numbers over time, but that is both their primary and their secondary marketplace. That more than doubled their 2021 total. So they are leading the way. They're at the top there, but close behind is, if you combine all the Dapper Labs properties, which is NBA Top Shot and NFL All Day, UFC Strike, and La Liga, that number is getting pretty close. That's like a near $300 million number, and that's only secondary volume in 2022.
Oh, that's right, because they didn't do primary in 2022 for these.
Exactly, yeah. So it's a bit of a difference in numbers, and also, again, that SoRare number, that includes all of their soccer offerings, which is across many different leagues, except for the English Premier League, which they just debuted this week. So it will start to include that. The biggest soccer league in the world is now part of it. But that includes their soccer, their MLB, and their NBA. So you do have some similarities there in terms of like how we look at the numbers, how you kind of amalgamate these sports properties. But probably, the biggest difference between those two companies right now, from a numbers standpoint only, especially from a volume perspective, is how much NBA Top Shot has fallen off. And that's like a story all around the NFT space. But their volume in 2021, to give you a difference, was $826 million volume for Top Shot versus 211. So they did a quarter of secondary volume in 2022 that they did in 2021. Maybe you could say that about a lot of NFT projects. Maybe we have to go look at everybody else. But that's a substantial drop off for a project that brought in lots of people. Their new projects like NFL All Day and UFC Strike and La Liga, those are new projects as of 2022. So we don't really even have 12 months yet of data to look back on. So volume-wise, if you combine primary and secondary, NBA Top Shot is way, way, way ahead of everybody. But in terms of like right now in this current running, that, they're definitely falling behind, I guess. Dapper as a whole is kind of falling behind SoRare a little bit. SoRare is on a kind of major growth trajectory. And the next number I'll use to kind of prove that is user growth. So I'm looking at this from like a 12-month perspective, January to January to January, the last 3 years. How many unique monthly buyers? Okay, not how many wallets. Now, how many times somebody showed up once in the past 2 years ago to buy one NFT pack on Top Shot or anything. I'm talking about people that have been coming in every month to buy something. From last year to this year, January to January, SoRare has almost doubled. They went from 28,000 to 50,000 in January. NBA Top Shot has lost. They went from 65,000 to 11,000. Okay. And I'm not here to paint just the negative picture. We're just giving the numbers for this right now. We'll get into the platforms after. NFL All Day has remained pretty steady. They've gone from 16,000 to 15,000. And again, Januaries are hard to compare for the NFL season because that is kind of like the crux of the NFL season. It's playoffs, but at the same time, a lot of teams are out. So it's a little bit of a topsy-turvy time. Also, it was their first year last year for NFL All Day, so a little subjective. And then the rest of the platforms, you're talking like Candy Digital, Panini, UFC Strike, all that stuff were well below a couple thousand users, all of them at about 1,000 users or less this current January. So right now, again, I'm going to line those numbers up again for this January that just finished. Active monthly buyers, So Rare, 50,000, Top Shot, 11,000, All Day, 15,000, and the rest are 1,000 or less.
Wow.
So that's where people are spending their time and spending their money.
So, and what's so interesting, you and I were talking about this before, because I really have not historically always understood the difference in the mechanics or the gamification between a So Rare and a Top Shot, for example. And I think it's maybe worth breaking that down for anybody else who doesn't really know. Like what I've come to learn is that basically what you have on the So Rare and the DraftKings side is, DraftKings has Rainmakers is more akin to like a sports betting on maybe steroids, you could call it, or like it's a souped up version of sports betting, whereas the Dapper products are a souped up version of sports cards, and there's a pretty a pretty clear difference between those two. I don't know if you want to elaborate a little bit more on what those offerings are for folks, but I think that's interesting to note.
You kept it simple, and you're absolutely right. And that's a good way to kind of like look at each product, is that So Rare has taken fantasy sports and been like, let's tokenize this on blockchain. And they've done a fantastic job. That's the only thing they ever really set out to do. And maybe now they'll expand into other ideas, but that's what they've done. And that's why it works so well, right? They have a mobile app where you can check your scores. You can't trade on it because of a giant Apple fee, but you can check your scores and everything, right? Like you can for DraftKings or FanDuel or whatever. So they have really nailed that. And I think that's contributed to the user growth because it's really easy to tap into the fantasy market who might want to try NFTs. And they also have a free product. You can just show up right now, Carly, go sign up. And I don't mean this as a promo, but get like 20 free cards of soccer or NBA and play for free and be able to win NFTs that are worth something even by doing that. So it's like the onboarding is simple because it's free. The Dapper side, and we can group together like Dapper and Panini and Candy into Collectibles, an extension of sports cards. That's what first brought me into the industry when I found this super elegant solution. I was like, oh my God, like why are we grading sports cards? It's ridiculous. Send them away, make sure they don't have little cuts on them or whatever. When we have this, it's in a sense so much better. But at the same time, it's limited by the collectible market, which has not necessarily seen an online offering, right? Like people playing fantasy sports, they've been playing fantasy sports on the internet for 15 years.
Yeah, well, I think the history of fantasy sport, like the first fantasy was in like the 80s or something. Like you had like in-person leagues of fantasy sports leagues happening in like the 80s or 70s or 60s or a while back.
And people have been collecting cards as well for a long time and trading them on eBay, but it's not quite the same. You know what I mean? It's not like this is So Rare. So there's the difference between that and DraftKings is in a way so small, but the difference between digital collectibles that have no physical equivalent, which is what every single physical collector is used to, is I think a giant leap. And that's why they've struggled, I think, to attract the larger sports collectibles market, which is why some of the numbers are down in there and they're not huge right now.
So here's the other question that I want to put as we talk about this, because you said there was a big collapse in the baseball card market in the 90s, for example, and they had this dynamic of oversupply and the price of baseball cards tanked. But it strikes me, and correct me if I'm wrong, but like in the physical card market, you don't know total supply. Like there's no website you can go on to, right, and know definitively, oh, like here's the supply of my Jeter, rookie card or whatever the case may be. Is there?
I believe so. I believe now with the internet, like they're a lot more transparent about that kind of stuff. I think in the 90s, they could get away with it, right? Okay. Like just by artificial scarcity, but then just putting them in every Walmart. I think that was a lot easier to do. But I think now because of the internet, they do publish that information.
Okay. Because my question was going to be like, is there a doomsdayness? Like is that a death knell? Or like, is that actually like, to me, there's a no-brainer. My initial reaction to digital sports cards is like, yeah, duh. You know what I mean? Like, of course, right? And then I didn't know if, actually, is there an obfuscation of supply element that actually keeps the collectible industry alive? It sounds like the answer is no. And that it really is just about a matter of getting that supply-demand equation right.
It is a matter of that, but I think something that we don't realize, especially in our community, because people are very, upset at the Dappers for like being like, why did you oversupply? You had something so good, right? And even with So Rare, people are like, are they going to oversupply too? I think something that we don't necessarily get exposure to, Carly, is the demands of the leagues themselves, Right. And maybe that's what happened in the 90s too. Maybe the Paninis and the Prisms were like, you guys got to keep, we expect this revenue. And it's something that like a Top Shot or Dapper, it's like, they're never going to say the NBA is making us sell you this stuff in a way that we don't want to. They can't say that. I don't know if that's what's happening, but if they have an agreement and they have to they have to drop a certain revenue back to the NBA every month, they're going to try and find ways to do that. And inevitably it might come to supply. Right. So I'm not saying that's what's happening. I don't know if that's what's happening, but I think I did a podcast last year that was like basically like the business of sports doesn't necessarily line up with the business of NFTs, because NFTs are about scarcity and value and, you know, kind of like this deeper paradigm, versus the business of sports is like make the on-court product amazing and then sell as much stuff as you can around it. Sell the merch, sell the tickets, sell the TV rights, sell the Gatorade, like whatever, just merchandise the shit out of it, so long as the part that's on the field is super good, right? So it's a bit of a difference, right? And they want to always renew that. Every year, every team makes 3 new alternate jerseys so that they can boost sales, right? Like that's part of the business of sports. But if you did that in NFT, like if every year you made 3 new versions of Bored Apes, it'd be like, no, that's terrible. Like, you can't do that. Like, it's awful, right? So there's a bit of an inherent difference there. I think that is we're now at that kind of intersection of like these collectible ones specifically, where the utility isn't proven and they're supposed to be just kind of basic collector's items. Is that going to work, right? And these companies, to kind of keep level setting, these companies have an unbelievable amount of runway, right? Like SoRare has $800 million of funding over all their funding rounds. Dapper is like $500 or $600 million, right? And even if they've cut staff or whatever, that's just, they have tons of time to figure this out. And their licenses are many, many years long. I think Dapper's license with the NBA is until the end of the decade, right? So that is a long time to find your MVP product, to use like a tech term, to go and find what that thing is that that's going to bring the millions to the product. The thing is, it might not be what it is right now.
Right. I'm actually interviewing Dapper. You knew I was supposed to be interviewing them before you and I had this conversation. One of them got sick, so we had to push the interview back.
I'm sorry.
It's all right. Well, we're having it. It'll probably be by the time. Let's see, when this airs. We'll see. It'll be coming out in the next couple of weeks. Whenever you're listening to this particular episode, the next week and a half or so. But I'm going to ask them. You know, I don't know if they'll answer honestly, but we're going to ask about your question around deals with the leagues and what does that require or necessitate. And I think it is important. Anytime you work inside a company, you see like, oh, the frustrations that the people outside the company have. Like, there's things that it's more complicated than that, and I can't necessarily say this or that, or like, you know, there's always complicating factors when you're in something.
And the other thing to remember, Carly, too, is that like sports, like a lot of other industries, they all follow each other, right? Like any brands, they all follow. Like, when anybody starts making money over here doing this, they're all going to start doing that, right? And what happened in the pandemic? Listen, Top Shot blew up. Oh my God, what's NFTs? This is amazing. There's barely any games right now. They're not selling tickets because they're having games, or they're having them in the bubble or whatever. And they're making money. They're finding a way to make money during a time where no one's making money. So that like instantly, as soon as Top Shot took off, yes, a bunch of fantasy people came in and started buying it, but also every other sports league was like, oh my God, we have to make this. We have to make these, please. And then you've got all these companies that kind of lined up being like, please give us your license. Please give us your license. You have, the Candy Digitals and Gary V and Michael Rubin and Fanatics kind of being like, all right, let's make a company. Let's go get us some rights, get the MLB, right? And that was a really smart idea at the time, because you didn't know how long the pandemic was going to last. I don't think there was a vaccine out yet or anything like that. So we're still at this kind of no man's land, end of 2020, start of 2021. These leagues, they want revenue. That's their model. So they'll jump on anything. And now it's like, that's over. There's butts in the seats. So what are these products going to become to sustain that?
And nothing exemplifies that better than Michael Rubin and Fanatics divesting their entire candy stake recently. And what did you make of his comments, Michael? It seemed like kind of an unnecessary parting shot maybe at Candy and that company, but basically saying, oh, what we've learned is that NFTs don't make for a good standalone business, and that it doesn't sound like Fanatics is stopping. It's not that they're doing nothing with NFTs, but they're doing their own. It sounds like in-house, they're partnering them with physical goods. They're using NFTs as like an add-on, as opposed to believing that it could be a standalone business in the form of Candy.
Candy really struggled, and we worked with them a bit at their launch, and they launched at the end of the 2021 season. They launched some NFTs, and they were very popular because it was like, finally, baseball cards. Like, what's the most classic sports collectible?
Thing.
Baseball cards, of course. But when the new season started, 2022, the demand fell off. I don't know if they oversupplied exactly, but their packs just weren't selling out. And I think they were kind of out of options, right? It's like, well, how else are we going to sell this? And also, I think the license is limited. They can't pivot to fantasy. The fantasy license belongs to So Rare. So it's like, as a tech product, it's like you can't, when you're bound to a league or to like something where you've bought a certain license, you can't just pivot to all these other products. You can't just make up a new product like other tech companies do. That's like, well, we have this fan base. Let's go make a new product that they're going to like and then grow to 10 million users. It's like, no, you can't have this license in this little lane. So whether he thinks that can be a viable business or not, maybe that's a comment on what I said earlier of like the business of sports does not align with the business of NFTs. I'm not sure why he said that. Maybe he just got annoyed that people didn't want to buy the thing that he thought they were going to want to buy. I don't know. Like everybody's bitter that didn't make money in NFTs, right? So, I'm not surprised.
We're going to talk about the macro trends in a little bit, but you're talking about licenses, and I want to touch on what's the name, likeness, nil, right? What's this new thing? So NIL. Players can now, and college
name,
sport players
are
now able to monetize in a way that they weren't able to previously. How does that play into this whole dynamic? And does it touch NFTs? Does it touch these companies we're talking about?
Great question. So we worked at the project a year ago called the Players Lounge, which was organized by some ex Georgia State players who were doing an NFT project that didn't touch on the Georgia IP, but touched on like the fan group. And what they did is they also recruited some ex-players to help promote it. And they're like, this is going to be a fan access token, and it's tokenized access to their Discord and to like hanging out and launch parties and watch parties and all that kind of stuff. So that kind of worked well. And that was them using their kind of clout to capitalize on their fan base from college. NIL is a really interesting and growing industry where for years and years and years, collegiate athletes made no money, right? Paid, under the table by the colleges to go there and to play there. But really these colleges, the NCAA, making billions of dollars on their backs. It's terrible, right? It's an awful, awful thing. So it's like, our college players, professional athletes? Well, considering how much money that the school's making, yes. But in terms of how much they're officially paid, no. So NIL has been this wonderful, industry that's grown. In terms of NFTs, like, I don't think we're quite there yet in terms of a player being able to really leverage that, mainly because I think there's not really a standard yet. There's no person who's made it in NIL NFTs. Right. And they're still kind of figuring out, like, they can sign their own deals with Gatorade if they want. Right. But there's no standard, like, here's how you monetize as an athlete individually in NFTs. That doesn't exist yet. There's no single athlete out there who has done that outside of working with the platforms.
Do they not need sign off? Like, can you use their name, image, likeness in a college sports card?
Absolutely. And that exists on Recur.
So why? So who owns that? Was that the NBAU or the NFTU? What was
NFTU,
it?
which was a Recur product, and I guess it's still around, but they haven't talked about it in a long time. So I don't know.
That was their very first Recur product. Well, Recur, I was just having this conversation earlier. Recur is going through a bit of a reorg, a rebrand, where they're moving away from, like, they're becoming more of like almost like a white label service for these companies to come and publish their NFTs, as opposed to being like high touch agency kind of product. So
I'd love to know what's going on with NFTU. I have a huge bag.
So who owns that? Who gives the consent that, yes, you can use these college players' images and make a bunch of money, and who makes that money?
Negotiated with them individually.
Every individual player.
Correct.
Whoa.
Or their agencies. Maybe like 20 of them are all signed to the same agency or something like that, but all repped as NIL. Correct.
Wow.
Yes. Yeah. So that's kind of how, so they negotiated with them individually.
So, but in theory, an individual player who was really good, if you have a Trevor Lawrence, right, who's the number one, pick coming out of college or something, like he could have said, all right, like, I'm going to go start printing my own, like, I'll make my own basically sports card of just Trevor Lawrence, and it'll be me, and you can go buy it. Like, in theory, is that something he could have done?
Yes, I think does he not have something on Candy Digital from before his playing career? Yeah, he does. So he had something on Candy from the early days of Candy before baseball. No, through Topps, I think.
They would have had to negotiate with, so they also have college players, but they negotiated with everybody individually.
With him and his team, that's what they would have had to do, is talk to him. Yes.
Because it seems like an interesting play would be to do it through your socials. You know what I mean? Be like, hey, come get my sports card. I'm dropping it on Instagram. No, I'm dead serious, right? Like, why wouldn't that be? That seems so interesting to me.
Absolutely. And some of them have done that, right? But the thing is that there's so many, like, you know, who do you trust? Like you're Trevor Lawrence, you're 21, you're finishing college, you're going to the NFL. Sure, you've got your agent who's going to help you get a great contract with the team that drafts you. And you've got people traditionally being like, okay, let's do a Nike, let's do a Gatorade, like let's take this meeting. Even those people don't know who the best NFT supplier is.
Right. That's what I'm saying. Just do it yourself on your own Instagram. I get it. Yeah. Like,
but even think about but compare it to like a brand. Even the brands launching now don't know who to work with. Like freaking Porsche. Like Porsche, you know, this is a huge brand, has worked with 1 million people. They still can't work with the right person in NFTs.
But I imagine there's more people. There's more college athletes who are natively into NFTs who probably buy and trade NFTs more than, you know, at Porsche HQ in whatever European country out of which Porsche resides. You know what I mean? So, but point taken. But there's definitely some like college athlete who's going pro who's like into NFTs. You know, that's got to be a thing.
Yeah, but they might not be very good.
Yeah. Whatever. It hasn't happened
it's
yet.
not necessarily true. But I'm saying, I think what you're saying in 5 years, yes.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I think definitely in a couple years when NFTs have more like widespread adoption platforms and it's a lot more self-custodial and you can just log into Instagram and mint NFTs to the people you like and whatever, 100%.
Right.
But I don't think those tools are there yet. So yes, maybe there's some college athletes, maybe Trevor Lawrence does use OpenSea, but is he going to go and figure out how to launch his own NFT? Like he's going to do it himself on OpenSea?
Instagram's plugged in with Polygon. It's still somewhat beta, but they're making that pretty easy to like.
But that's what I'm saying is that it's a couple years away, but then there will be a Trevor. What you're saying is like what you're saying will happen. It just hasn't happened yet. So there will be a Trevor Lawrence who before doesn't sign with anybody, cuts out the middleman, launches his own NFTs. Everybody loves it. Yes, that'll happen. Yep. But no, we're not there yet. Not that easy.
So before we get to this sort of macro and tie it all up with a bow, though I say that, but I'm sure we'll leave being like, well, guess we'll wait and see. You know, I'm sure it won't feel like a bow. There's one more platform we haven't talked about that I think we need to talk about, and that is Autograph. I mean, poor Tom Brady just taking hit after hit. Actually, he announced his retirement finally. I mean, it feels so anticlimactic because how many times can you announce retirement, you know? But, you know, between... you know, his divorce and FTX and Autograph, it feels like that, you know, in a sort of a bad Buck season. What's going on with Autograph?
Tom Brady, he's such a nerd. I love him. He's like, even in his little video this morning, I'm like, oh, you know, I kind of understand. He's so awkward.
Yeah.
And I kind of love him for it. You know what I mean? Like, he's not trying to be cool. He's just like, hey guys, it's me.
Like, I'll just cut right to the chase because, you know, I know I
right
can't.
To the chase. I'm going to retire, you know, and just like he's been media trained to smile all the time. So that's why it's there. Right. No, it's true. Otherwise he'd just be like, hey guys, you know, he'd just be like all sad. Listen, Autograph's in a tough spot. Let me be honest with you, because when Tom Brady retired the first time, he said he was going to focus more on Autograph, and then he unretired. And
he's like, I'm going to focus less on Autograph.
He's like, just kidding.
In his retirement speech, he's like, actually, I'm going to focus a lot less on Autograph.
Yeah, listen, that's listen. There's none of these other platforms have like literally the greatest player in their sport who's still alive and young, still playing, being like, guess what? I'm going to focus entirely on this platform. That doesn't exist for anybody else. So when he said that, everybody was like, oh, fuck yeah, buy some freaking Autograph. And he was like, just kidding, which surprised everybody and clearly gave him a lot of other problems in his life. Yeah. His co-founder is 25 years old and somebody who's never really run a business and is the son of his neighbor. And that's a really tough situation to be in, because the biggest criticism that there's been of Autograph is the leadership. There's no transparency. The product doesn't really know where it's going. They, because it's Tom Brady, signed the absolute biggest names in sports that exist. Tiger Woods, Wayne Gretzky, like the people that are the goats of their sports. They went and got them, airdropped them onto freaking Autograph. And of the entire sports collectible industry, Carly, like go back to when you were a kid. What was the most valuable thing you could get from a famous person? Was an autograph. Like, oh my God, like forget selfies. Selfies didn't exist back then. It was like, please sign my friggin' by napkin.
Baseball,
like you get any, but even you'd be like, if you saw a famous person on the street,
it's on my
you're
back.
like, what do you have anything? Like just you'd be like, give me whatever you have. Let's sign this book, you know, like anything. Right. So, you know, there's such an inherent value in a sense to an autograph. So the idea for it to me is great. And it's Tom Brady. He's the greatest. Here are all the other greatest athletes. Awesome. Execution has been terrible. I talked to their community quite a few times to do that podcast a couple months ago, and mixed results, but there's still room for recovery. The biggest faux pas they've made is when they went in the Discord and pretended to be Tom Brady. Right. That's the most messed up thing. Right. I think one of those, like, it's too insane to believe like one of those NFT things that's like, that's such a, you know, that happens sometimes in NFTs where you're like, that's the craziest shit somebody could do. It's so dramatic. And that's exactly what they did. Tom Brady was at practice. They went in Discord and said AMA with Tom Brady. And then the community went and sniffed it out and literally DM'd with the reporter who covers the practice for the Bucks and was like, hey, was Tom Brady at the field at this exact time? And the reporter said yes. And the players don't have access to their phones. So there was no chance that he was even on the sidelines during practice DMing in Discord. So there's some kind of like twisted stuff there that if he's going to focus on it, he's going to have to give it a lot of effort to
going to give it that good old like Tom Brady from, you know, kind of a little pudgy recruit, you know, 18th round draft pick, whatever he was, to becoming the Tom Brady we know and love today. I mean, hey, man.
Do you think Tom Brady is good at anything besides playing football?
No, probably not. I mean,
like, is he good at running a business? You know what I mean? Like, even what is he going to do other than be in the Discord, which is good.
I fear for him. Like, if you've dedicated that, no, I'm actually so serious. If you've spent that much of your
fear for him
just thinking about football and training your body, like, and that's all you do. That is all you live, breathe, die for. You will lose your supermodel wife to maintain it. Like, what do you do?
What an insane.
Well, you've got another 50 years to live, maybe. I mean, who knows? Maybe not. But like 30 to 50 years, like, what are you going to do? So anyway, I mean, look, I guess he's just an obsessive. And so maybe, and he was a smart player, you know what I mean? He wasn't just a physical player. In fact, if anything, he was probably more a smart player. So, you know, he's got a brain. So maybe he just becomes like a business obsessive and, you know, I don't know. I like do worry for him though. I'm like,
he already has a deal with Fox for when he retires.
Right. Like the biggest deal ever to announce.
So Tom Brady is going to be on the air starting in September.
I just like, I almost feel like he's not going to like that. Because I know him so well, you know, close personal friend to Tom Brady, Carly Riley.
You know Tom Brady.
You know,
are you the co-founder of Autograph with those two? Like, you're the third one. You're the secret co-founder.
I'm the secret anon co-founder. That would be a plot twist.
You just asked for some punishment by asking me about how terrible Autograph is.
Yeah.
You're like, please lay it on.
Just tell me what we can do better. Anyway, okay. Well, you know, what bums me out, because I think you see this across so many industries. I mean, you look at it with the National Geographic thing that just happened. That was kind of a disaster. And it's like, you have all these great artists and photographers who roped into that. And you're describing all these amazing athletes that got roped into Autograph. And then the things don't really pan out. And you just imagine all of these people out there in the world who just have this negative impression of NFTs because so many of these things just haven't panned out. Now, you know, it's too early to call the game, right? And there's plenty of time, and there's second acts that can come here, but that is interesting.
We don't know where things are going to go from here. Right. And I think that's kind of like the big thing here is that we've had our first hurrah, and this is the same with the rest of the NFT space. But sports have a bit more of a ticking deadline. Like most NFT projects, PFPs, whatever, 99% will wither and die, and that's it. There'll be weird exit stories of the, you know, from the Discords. There'll be like Cameo yesterday. That's like, hey, you know what? The executives of Cameo said they don't want to do this anymore. Sorry, everybody. You know, and there's nothing you can really do. That'll happen. But for sports, it's like, no, they're funded. The licenses are lasting a while. Right. There's hundreds of millions of dollars. They got to make something. They got to make something work.
Okay, and let's do this to wrap up this little section, which is and also there's also a bunch of stuff that is working. So Rare is working. 50,000, you know, active users in the month of February, in the month of January, and
buyers. That's buyers. And they have a free product. They have a free product where a lot of people don't buy anything.
Yeah, I mean, you know, you've got active buyers and you have what was the number we said in terms of the hundreds of million, $350 million or something, you know, that were traded over 2022. Like, look, that's very real money. And we didn't say this above, but again, what I've sort of learned talking to you is that, again, it is sort of fantasy on steroids, because at the beginning of the season, you can buy up the players that you think will be worth more later in the season for these like daily fantasy games. And so you have this double element where it's not like just that you can win money because the player you own did well that game, but you can also win money because you're selling player. You can buy 50 of a particular player in the front of the game, and you can sell the player as that player becomes popular and does well later. And there is that strategic element to it that is even where the ownership piece clearly adds something. And even if you don't prefer it, maybe there's people who don't prefer it to regular daily fantasy, fine, but it adds something. And there's clearly a way in which the on-chain component, the NFT component is additive to what's going on. And you know, I see it, you know, DraftKings Rainmakers, when that product was launched, my fiance Zach was like, came in the morning and was like, oh my God, wait, this looks really cool. Like, it was the first time he'd shown real excitement about an NFT product. And I don't think he's actually used it, but but he was excited about it. And so I think that's awesome. So where is the community, like the sports NFT community? And it sounds like it's probably a little bit divided in sentiment. If you were a big autograph fan or a big Dapper fan, maybe you're struggling a little bit. If you were a Sorare fan, maybe you're thriving. But what is the general feeling of what the future of sports and NFTs hold, and where people are bullish and how people are feeling?
Great question. So you have to remember, sports fans are incredibly resilient people, right? Even if we're sports bettors, highs, lows.
I mean, they're not Patriots fans, but they've just been trained to be
take your shots.
Little babies.
They're used to shots. They're used to shots, right? And it's an incredibly emotional ordeal to be a sports fan, right? It's like you can be a moviegoer, and sure, it's emotional. You cry at the sad parts, but there's no like you're sure you could read the tabloids and be mad when somebody, Kanye did something, whatever. But it's like sports. You openly subject yourself to emotion, right? There's 30 teams. Only one of them is going to win, so you have a high chance of losing. And the other thing too is that if you're a very obsessed sports fan, you subscribe to the seasonality of sports, right? There's like 2 days a year where there's like a dead day in sports, where it's like in between the playoffs and something else. There's no sports that day. There's no tournaments, nothing. And it's like, what do you do? And what's nice about sports and makes it such a valuable industry is that it regularly renews its content, right? So that's what makes it entertaining to fans and keeps the money flowing in and out, is that it's like there's always something new. It's one of the only sources of of new ideas and new content, you could say, in the world, where it's like every year there's going to be new stuff. Every year there's going to be new players. Every couple of years the players you love will retire and new ones will rise to stardom, right? So it's really exciting. And I think when it comes to NFTs, whether your bags are in something that's gone down heavily or they're investing in a place that's gone its way up or whatever, I think that inevitably as a sports fan, you're bringing that same philosophy. You're like, well, there will be better days. Like, just because my team has sucked for 20 years doesn't mean they won't suck in the future. And I think that that's like a general attitude, whether that's healthy or not, for something that's like a financial product like this in a market where there is no guarantee of success. I don't know, but I can definitely feel that in the community, that people there is a kind of blind optimism there that is carried into these products. And you can feel it from the founders. You can feel it from the community leaders, that they even like teams that fucking suck, Carly, like the Jets. It's like there are still fan groups. I'm sorry, but there are still fan groups that get together every year and be like, we're excited for another Jets season.
Oh,
we're
my
excited
family.
To win.
I grew up with them.
Yeah. We're excited to just win 3 games this year again, right? Like they
they
show up
every
time. They show up every year and they take those L's. And inevitably, I mean, it's a really weird way to paint the sports NFT community, but we're in that same boat.
Yeah.
We're ready to take the L's and we're ready to take the W's, right?
Yeah.
So ready for whatever's next.
I like it. We'll end this episode maybe with what do you think are the biggest bright spots? We may talk about ticketing a little bit. We haven't really talked about ticketing, but let's move into the big macro stories maybe in sports, and sure, there may be tie-ins here for NFTs. There may not. I think the first one, there's clearly a tie-in, and we've been talking about it, which is sports betting. And I'll ask you on some of these other ones, but we'll just say on the sports betting side. I mean, there was a law that was overturned. Is that how this worked? In 2018, there was a law that was overturned that is what kind of cleared the way for sports betting to be legalized state by state as it's been done. And I've like felt this play out. There was a Jersey with sports betting was legal. In New York, it wasn't. So, in my household, we'd be like Zach would be texting his brother who lives in Jersey to like place his sports bets. You know what I mean? And then we're driving cross country and it's like, oh, we in a state, let me check if this is a state in which I can legally sports bet. And it feels like, and now I think it's legal in New York. I'm pretty sure. Right. And so now he's sports betting here. So, I'm watching the playing out of this getting legalized slowly. And to call it a cottage industry in sports it feels like such an understatement. Like, you look at something like Barstool Sports, which increasingly is just like coverage of bets as much as it's coverage of the games. It's basically these commentators who are talking about how their bets are doing on the games as they watch the game. So sports is one of those amazing things where it can sustain one industry and then it can sustain 6 other industries that are all built up around that industry. And sports betting is massive and growing as the laws allow it to.
Well, for a long time, sports betting was seen as a terrible thing, right? Through the 90s, early 2000s, early 2010s. It was like even the commissioners of the league were like, betting is bad. right? Like,
Why
we
was
don't
this
want
like a
people
don't
betting.
say, like just say no, like puritanical thing that just continued?
Yeah,
or?
it's betting is an addiction.
Right, that's true.
Betting is bad. You know, gambling is bad. It's terrible. It ruins people's lives. Yeah, we're degens.
I know.
Anyways,
Well, it's also like anything, right? You know what I
people
mean?
in NFTs are like, yeah, I know.
I know, like,
Thanks. I fucking know.
I have no
I'm
money.
pretty messed up, you know, like, but it is,
Yeah.
right? And I think, you know, you also went through a lot of different scandals in sports where players would bet. You went through
that's true.
referee
Throwing
scandals in the
games
NBA,
to make money.
Pete
That's
Rose
true.
in the MLB, right? So it's like something like it wasn't even just like nobody had considered how it could work.
Strange incentives.
Exactly. Nobody considered how it could work. It was just like, no. We don't play sports so that other people can win money. That's why. But then the result of that, Carly, was that it made sports betting fucking cool, right? It was like illegal, right? You're like, yo, we're like trading alcohol in the 1930s here, man. Like, this is cool. Let's place bets secretly, or like come over, you know, my house would bet $1 million against you. You know, like that made it kind of cool and made people get into it. In 2008, I believe they passed a law. Or around then, that killed online gambling. That was like, you can't have an online like slot machine, right? Because that's chance. But what it did allow was for skill-based games like fantasy sports, right? So so it outlawed sports gambling, because you can't say like, okay, I'm going to pick the Jets over the Patriots, illegal. But it said, you know, it's fine for things like if you're smart. So that's where the FanDuels and the DraftKings and all that were born, was like, oh shit, we can totally make apps. And this is at the explosion of mobile apps too, right? Like end of the 2000s, iPhones just came out. People are building apps like crazy. You can just launch anything, Instagram, whatever. Like, we can build mobile apps where people can sign up, place their bets, win, cash out in like 4 hours. Like, that is unbelievable. So that's where you had the explosion of fantasy sports platforms, right? And then due to that, and I think probably a few other factors, some of the leagues started to soften on that, right? Like, and I think it was actually Adam Silver who took over in the NBA, I think in 2013, who's been a fantastic commissioner, who's like driven revenue through the freaking roof, and he's quite awesome. He was one of the first people who came out and was like, you know what, I think sports betting is fine. I don't have a problem with it. I think we should, like, he didn't say we should legalize it, but he's like, there's no problem with it. Like, let's let people bet on sports. And towards around like 2018, which is I think when you're talking about that law, they gave every state the choice to legalize sports betting. Mm-hmm. And like overnight, like 7 states were like, yes, done, 100%, come bet in our state. And now it's still a little contentious. I don't think every state has it, but most of them do. And that's when the leagues were like, oh, you know what, let's go make some money on this. 2021, the NFL brought in $12 billion on betting products, betting like offers, like advertising, like a mix of all that. College football, $8 billion brought in on betting. So it went from evil and spawning fantasy sports to fantasy sports being the only thing allowed, then encouraging sports betting to be totally fine. If you want a really great YouTube video, there's one from Wendover Productions called How the Sports Betting Industry Quietly Consumed America. If you kind of want to track that whole story, it's a really good, obviously a dark ending, because they paint, you know, gambling is bad, which again, we really do have to acknowledge that it is. And, you know, to stay within your limits if you are. Right.
I mean, don't you think
doing that 2 hours into the show?
It's
2 hours into the show, just so you guys know, don't buy any of this stuff. Make your own decisions.
Yeah. Do whatever. What's the term? I can't think today. This is my second 2-hour podcast of the day, so I'm really starting to my machine. Wow. I'm really starting to slow my roll on brain function wise. But no, that's it's I mean, yes, I think the caveat's well deserved, though it does feel like the kind of thing where it's like, you know, if you can do it in moderation and you do it in moderation and it's kind of an enhancement to your life and it's not something that consumes your life, that's kind of a lovely thing. And I think we all need to have some level of vice, you know, like, again, the Tom Brady and Gisele Bundchens of the world seem to be the exception to that. And I like, God bless that they're seem, I guess, happy or whatever in their like perfect little bubbles. But most of us need, like, you know, the occasional wine or cake or sports betting. So, you know, it happens. Yeah,
that's it. And that's like, I know you want to talk about like macro stuff. So I think that's one thing to really consider. And this year, everyone's going to watch the Super Bowl and every second ad is going to be for sports betting. Last year was for crypto. This year it's going to be for sports betting. And they are everywhere. And that's quite tremendous. People want to gamble. They want to gamble on sports. And there's no doubt that has been a really good match for the NFT market to bring it all the way back, right? Again, pandemic, nothing to do. Sports are being played in empty arenas. You can bet on that shit. And guess what? Here comes the sports collectible industry, which is different than the gambling industry. And to give you a sense of just how different it is. I have some numbers here. Fantasy, which I guess fantasy, like you don't really bet on sports in NFTs. You bet on players. So like, let's say fantasy, the fantasy industry did $21 billion in 2021, and that's expected to double by 2027. Fantasy sports on the up. And I guess you could consider like the So Rares and the DraftKings, that counts as fantasy. I don't know if it's included in that number, but
it's not.
That's part.
I imagine they're not adding
be.
So Rare.
But,
so, and that's just like the interesting thing is like, what is the delta? Like if 21 billion and a projected 44 billion or whatever, 42 billion is like kind of the expected TAM there, right? The total addressable market. Like what percent of that is, how much better is it made to what percentage of people to add the NFT component? And that's like an interesting way to look at like how much growth room there's there. I don't know that answer. Again, I imagine that there is a segment of the population that may never want it to be via NFTs. I don't know.
But NFTs can become the back layer of all of that. That's
right? The thing, right? It's like, why not make something ownable in some ways? Sort of is where I end up falling. It's like, just make it ownable. Like, it's not really hurting anything. And
it might also, blockchain could be the thing that powers all that down the line too, right? So anyways, but just to compare, because in our world here of sports, crypto, there's stuff that's not fantasy, right? Like the Dapper stuff, the collectible stuff, that's not fantasy. That's sports collectible. But sports collectibles are going to more than double that in 10 years. The sports collectible industry is set to hit $92 billion in 10 years from now. And again, that's like everything from like you have like a baseball glove from freaking 1960 that's signed by whoever. Like that counts as sports collectible, but that is tremendous. And even now in the pandemic, you still see like, listen, the freaking latest LeBron gold card that's signed a graded 10 goes for $4 million. That still happens.
The collectible industry is double the size of the fantasy industry?
It's projected to be, in 10 years.
Well, but and currently where is it? Currently, where is it? Do you know? Is it currently more? Because that shocks me.
I actually don't have that. I had that it's projected to be $92 billion, but I could look that up really quick.
What's so interesting is presumably it's bigger than the current fantasy industry, right? Because it's not like the rate of growth is projected to be.
No, I'd say it's also like it's probably like half that. Like I think they're both set to double.
That's interesting.
Roughly in the next 10 years.
That's so interesting to think that in NFTs right now, fantasy, NFT backed fantasy sports is bigger than the collectibles because So Rare's doing more, but not just that, like you said, you don't have the numbers for Rainmakers and DraftKings, and you've got to imagine, so we don't know what we have to add on to the So Rare numbers to get that total kind of fantasy number. But that in the real world, quote unquote, it's the reverse, that the collectibles market is actually bigger.
Hold on. There's a new study published today that says, so the sports memorabilia and trading card market touched $35 billion in 2023. What? That doesn't make any sense.
We're one month in.
They're forecasting it to be 227 billion by 2032.
227? That's bigger than you just said. You just said 92 billion. It just tripled right here on the pod.
Fueled by the COVID epidemic and easy access to collectibles via reputable online marketplaces, sports memorabilia, along with trading cards, is expected to reach 227 billion by 2032.
Do you know what just trading cards is?
No.
If you take out...
Should I?
I don't know. No, I'm wondering. I'm wondering if I'm trying to make the most direct comp to like a Dapper that I can. Because the whole collectibles market, to your point, is also a glove from XYZ. What is just the trading card market? Anyway, I'll throw out a couple other numbers here and then we'll wrap on this number section. But you put this here. You said the market for sports betting went from 500,000 players in 1988.
Oh, that's right.
To 57 million basically in 2015. So from 500,000 to 57 million over those, whatever
fantasy.
That is, 30
that's
years.
Just fantasy.
That's just
that's
fantasy.
Fantasy players. Yeah. So there are 57 million people 8 years ago that were playing fantasy sports. So I'm sure it's probably double that by now.
Yeah.
Compared to just 500,000 back in 1988 when it was all paper and pen, right?
And I don't know what year this is for, but along with 18 hours a week, the average
it's all from
person.
2015.
2015, okay. The average person spent 18 hours a week watching sports, and they spent 9 hours consuming fantasy.
Consuming fantasy content, reading about it, betting it, whatever. Yeah.
Crazy. Huge.
So fantasy is pretty tremendous, right? But what the point I'm trying to make, Carly, is that fantasy seems quite tremendous and it has grown a lot. But if you compare it to the sports collectible industry, it's half the size.
It's dwarfed by the collectibles industry.
And that's where that's kind of like, to kind of like give the yin to the yang from earlier. It's just like, yes, some of the collectible platforms are struggling to find their like product that's going to grow them, but inevitably they're in an industry that is twice the size of the fantasy, right? So it's like if they can unlock whatever that's going to be, or even maybe Dapper will go and buy like the company you were talking about, or StockX, or some of the other places that are like online digital or physical digital collectible kind of places, marketplaces. Maybe just go buy that and integrate it. I don't know, right? Like but it's clear that they're going to have some growth there, and it's clear that the market for sports memorabilia and cards is way bigger than fantasy.
Huge. Because
it can expand easier. Fantasy is like, do you know who's going to score a touchdown today? That's it. Like that's the end of the fantasy question. You don't need, or online, like just betting. That's the only question. But memorabilia can expand forever, right? Like you can always come up with new products and you'll always make new memories.
Very interesting. Okay. Yeah. Let's talk trend number 2 that you think is sort of a big part of the macro sports industry conversation, or a trend in sports.
The death of cable television. Is that what you're asking me? That's what you're alluding to, is cable TV will die.
Or sports as the like last thing keeping broadcast alive. Because is sports primarily on cable or broadcast?
Both. It's both. So when's the last time you watched something that was live, that wasn't a sporting event, that was actually live when you were watching it? Maybe SNL?
Maybe. That probably was. Maybe. Or I think I considered watching the Meghan and Harry on Oprah interview, but I think I still ended up watching that later.
Was it live? They shot it live?
Oh, no. No, you're right.
It was a premiere. It was a premiere, but it was the premiere was live. It was not live. It wasn't shot at that time.
Yeah, for sure, SNL.
Nothing else you're watching. No late night shows. No, Masked Singer. None of that is being filmed at that moment.
And I also don't watch any of that stuff. So
no, but I'm saying the things that are like prime time. Oh, it's in prime time. You have to watch this superhero show or this cop show or
it's a premiere.
Yeah, or any of that kind of stuff. All that is a premiere. All that's shot. All that can come out anytime it wants. You can premiere things in your video on demand system. You can premiere things in Netflix tonight at 8 on Netflix, or what's hot right now, Last of Us. Okay, at 9 it comes out, right? Like you have these premieres, but none of those are live. The only thing that people watch on TV that's live is the news, which insists on being live, but doesn't really need to be live. And that's kind of like, do you still watch our parents watch the news? But like, I don't turn on the news. Maybe you guys do.
No, never.
Sports is the only thing that people come over and you all get together and like, we're watching this live, and Olympics counts as that, World Cup, all that kind of stuff. So there's a couple different storylines there. One is that in 2022 in the US, out of the top 100 broadcasts on TV, 82 of them were NFL games out of what people watched.
Oh my gosh.
Yes. Football rules America. Okay. And that includes all the other shows that are filmed beforehand. So that's the extent to which the ABCs and the NBCs and all that kind of stuff are like, if we don't have sports, we got jack shit. We don't have anything because everyone's on Netflix and the Disneys and whatever. And even now you have the Apples and the Amazons making their own TV shows, right? So it's like you have this long, slow death of just normal cable broadcast TV that's just going away. Those cable companies are hanging on for dear life, and they are paying obscene amounts for the TV deals. Right now, this year, the NBA's TV deal is worth 26% of the league's revenue. That's how much they're getting paid. They're getting paid $2.6 billion annually for NBA broadcasting rights. I'm sure the NFL is way more than that, or maybe about the same because they have fewer games. But that's like there's no other source of revenue, not tickets or merch or anything else comes even close to being such a huge share of a league's revenue than the TV deal.
So what I hear when I hear that is almost like that has to end at some point, right? Like that's clearly going to end. And the question is, do these high premium? Well, right. Like, I mean, clearly the streamers want it, and you've got Amazon makes deals and Hulu makes live sports deals, and they're all trying to get into it or whatever. But like, will they always be able to command such a high price in terms of, will they always be able to command $3 billion for the rights to air it live?
So that's a great question. This is something I mentioned to you when we had spoken a little while back, and something that's a little bit, not everybody needs to agree to this. So I'm going to say this in advance. And this idea is something that my friend and great community contributor, Corporate Trash, put me onto this idea about how in 10 to 15 years, once AI is smart enough to write TV shows, that sports will be the last stand of original content that is unscripted. Even right now, Netflix makes decisions on what kind of movies to make based on data. They don't make it because they are like, oh, I have a great idea. No, they look at like, what do you like? What are you in your demographic? What do you want to see? Let's make more of those shows. That's what they've been doing for a long time. Sports is unscripted. Sports has new people, has new storylines, always has something new and fresh. And that in 20 years from now, when all content is being made by computers, sports won't be. Sports will be the only thing that is still original. And that's where you've seen so many, like the value of sports teams absolutely skyrocket in the last decade. This year alone, the valuations of NHL teams are up 19% for a fucking hockey team. Like most NHL teams are worth more than $1 billion now, which is crazy. Like I don't even know what $1 billion is anymore because it's so common, but it's like, that's insane. If you go back 10 years, like that's crazy that any team would be worth $1 billion. And now most of them are. But again, I think a lot of people are saying that that's on the idea that sports teams are going to be one of the last valuable things you can have because sports content is going to be so valuable.
I don't know if I buy it. I don't know if I buy it from a couple of places. First of all TV is scripted now. You know what I mean? Like it's already the only unscripted thing, right? Like to your point, other than news, because unscripted just sort of means live, but I mean, even news is scripted with a teleprompter. Like it sort of depends, like what are you evaluating this on? So like the shift from it was a human writer who made this TV show to it was an AI writer who made this TV show. First of all, I'm not as convinced with other people that that's going to happen as fast as people think. I think we will have human creatives. It just changes. It's like really exceptional creatives actually become more valuable, in my opinion, in a world with AI and sort of mediocre, crank it out content. Basically, you don't no longer need a human to do that.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I don't think in 10 or 15 years, all content is made by AI. I actually think you just have like higher quality human made content. Mm-hmm. But even if it was, why does that make sports more valuable now than it is then? Or, I don't necessarily see how that makes sports more valuable than it is today.
It's just predicated on the idea that like I think it's predicated on the idea that once more computers are making more content will be harder to distinguish. Right now, we're pleased by that because it's like, great, you're figuring out what we like and we're getting those preferences. But in the future, it'll all blend together too much. And there will be a desperate need for stuff that isn't exactly the way you want it to be. Right. Like, so even like, I think you could even say that it's like the pain that comes from watching the Bills lose is like something that a TV show will never show you in the future. It'll never make you feel that way. But the Bills will. I don't know. It's a theory,
but it's an interesting theory.
It's an interesting theory. Yeah, no. And I'm sure that there's a million other factors at play there. I'm sure that that's not the only reason that sports team values are skyrocketing, but there is without a doubt a huge interest in sports clubs. Like that is one of the hottest things you could have bought in the last 10 years and especially like the fringe things, not just NBA teams, NHL teams, MLS teams, like the next level, the next tier down of sports, not just the NFLs and the NBAs and soccer teams, like the next tier down, MLS, same thing. Like their values went completely
And I
insane.
wonder, there's also such a social cachet to it, right? Like the idea of being, I feel like every man I know like dreams of owning a sports team. Like, every you're like, hey, Carly, if you had $250,000, like, right, like what would you do with all the money in the world? And like most of the people in my life would be like, I'd buy a team, like, yeah. Like there's like a male fantasy. It feels like it's predominantly a male thing, like where it's like owning a sports team, a professional sports team is just like the dream. And everybody I feel like thinks that they can run the team better than whoever's running the team and, shouting on the couch, being like, you idiot, the calls that I would have made instead.
How about this is like an extension of the thesis is that what's become incredibly valuable in the last like 15 years, content. Right? Content is king. Content is everywhere. The rights to like, what did Disney do in the last 15 years? They bought Star Wars.
Franchises.
They bought
Pixar.
Marvel. Yes. They bought IP so that they could crank it out. So the idea is not just original content, but it's like the original content in the way that you can always make new stuff with it. Right? So it's like in 20 years, are we still going to is Star Wars going to be mined to shit? There's going to be billions of Star Wars stories, which is fine. It won't be quite as special perhaps. But something like a sports team is, I think in the last 10 years has been seen as the same as a Star Wars of like, hey, I need to get this fire hose of content under my umbrella because it is always going to produce. Star Wars, you got to hire some AIs or some writers now to go make new stories. You got to hope they're good. A sports team will every year will make a new story. Doesn't matter what's happening. New story every year.
I like that better. And I think that, and Star Wars is actually an interesting example. I was talking about it earlier, but like, Disney has always been very careful about trying not to like bleed their franchises dry. That's what they've done so well, is like making strategic decisions. So, they're trying to figure out what to do with Star Wars, but I know they're trying to be very strategic and not just bleed it dry too hard. But that makes sense, right? It's almost like the costs are more,
it's more efficient. It's more efficient.
It's
more efficient. It's a flame that never. It's a content flame that never goes out.
Okay, interesting. All right, let's do this last trend here. I think this is really interesting. Do you wanna lay it out for us? Or do you want me to talk about this? The Saudis. The Saudis are coming for your sports, everybody. The Saudis are coming for everything.
Yeah, they got. Listen. This is something actually when I was researching this, Carly, that I discovered. They have the Saudi Vision 2030.
Yes.
That they laid out 7 years ago. That
yes, I remember this.
Yeah, Saudi Arabia is going to be like the freaking Paris of the world. It's going to be the most amazing place, and we're going to diversify
our Vision Fund
investments.
To you, and I was like, Vision Fund is what SoftBank is doing. I'm like, what? But it's Saudi Vision 2030.
Yes, so they have this massive initiative to really modernize, maybe not culturally.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, I guess women can drive now, but
but
like,
they want to be.
Woman, but.
They want to be a major player on the international like commerce scene, tourism scene, and they just want to be. They want to be an important country. You know what I mean? Like I think Saudi Arabia wants to be in the G7. Like they want to be like, why aren't we important? We're super fucking rich. Like we should matter. And putting all their eggs in the oil basket, they clearly realize, like everybody else, is like that's not the way you do it. You diversify. Right. So you can read a lot about that. It's really fascinating to read about it. And there's that crazy city they're building that we were talking about the other day. Oh, insane, right? But they want to do it. Sports, they are pissing people off. Last year they started a tournament called Live Golf, or rather they funded a tournament called Live Golf, which is like the first ever competitor to the PGA Tour. They went and signed all these huge golfers, and everybody like went totally lost their freaking minds when they did that. Millions of dollars.
Massive contract. Wasn't it like $100 million with like some of these guys? I mean, these were crazy contracts. No.
They did. Yeah. They gave Phil Mickelson like $200 million or something like that. Like just a crazy amount of money.
Yeah, because otherwise you're going to get a lot of shit for it. Like they murdered a journalist, right? Like it's like that there's going to be a lot of pushback to you taking Saudi money.
Absolutely.
So you got to give it enough that it's like, I don't care. I can drown out the voices of the mob. I can drown out my own conscience with the bathtub full of money I am swimming in.
Money does buy a lot of things, unfortunately, especially in that world. So, Live Golf is like, and they're coming to their second season this year. So that's something to watch. And they've just put like a huge stake in all these different things like that. They have Cristiano Ronaldo has gone there now. Usually it's been, the MLS kind of exists as like a place for Euro stars to go and retire, for huge stars from all over the world, soccer world, to go and retire in the MLS, like David Beckham or Thierry Henry. But Ronaldo ain't going there. He ain't going to play for the LA friggin' whatever, or what's the New York team? The Bulls or something? Red Bulls? I don't know. Anyway, you don't know. I don't follow the MLS. And Toronto FC, he's not going to play there. But he never will, because he's going to play in Saudi Arabia for 5 years. So he's going to play there. They have a 15-year contract with the F1 that just started 3 years ago. They have a 10-year deal with the WWE. They almost bought it a couple weeks ago. That was a rumor when Vince McMahon came out of retirement. It was apparently to sell it to the Saudis. That hasn't happened. They have $1 billion stake in Live Nation, like the ticketing event platform. And they're currently bidding on the 2030 World Cup alongside Greece and Egypt. A lot of names in that bucket for the 2030 World Cup. And also, Carly, our countries are co-hosting the 2026, in case you didn't know that, along with Mexico. So it's a North American affair for the next World Cup. That's right.
I did know that, actually. Okay.
Yeah. So, but the one after that, they're bidding for it, which again would be kind of controversial, because very similar to Qatar, not the most savory human rights track record, but hey, the FIFA doesn't give a shit about that. FIFA doesn't care about that, man. FIFA is
that was going to stop FIFA. Would have stopped them.
Human rights. What do you mean? FIFA's like, we have a women's World Cup. What are you talking about? Like, we love humans. Like we're good. It's like, no, they're awful. So. And they just announced a whole other fund, which they just announced like 2 weeks ago, to build arenas, gyms, tracks all over the country.
What's so interesting is I've always been very fascinated by the Middle East and by Saudi Arabia, and the writing's been on the wall on the oil side for a long time, and the first thing was clearly tech, and they're trying to make a big foray into tech, and MBS was going around meeting with all the tech guys. I think even before he was king or whatever, his official top of the food chain kind of a thing was happening. Like they were. I remember 7 years ago when they announced the Vision Fund, because I was working for a company here in New York that was doing some work, like was going to be doing some exhibitions and building things over in Saudi Arabia as part of the Vision Fund 2030. And so it felt like tech was the first thing that he was meeting with everybody in tech. And then I've been hearing on the media side, I think in the aftermath of Khashoggi, I was just having this conversation today, like, they realized like, oh, we need to start controlling some of the global narratives better. And so I'm hearing people talk about how they're making now, looking to make investments on the media side. And then you have the sports thing. So again, that, they're really all over the place. And it makes sense. And sports are such a cultural, export. And if you want that soft power, controlling sports and entertainment is incredibly powerful.
Absolutely.
And
absolutely.
I don't know if how much this ties to the NFT story, except that they're obviously making metaverse investments as well. Because again, it almost feels like, it's sort of like how a study, if you want to prove that eggs are healthy or you want to prove that eggs are unhealthy, you can you're just going to find the article you want. Like if you just Google, if you Google literally anything and Saudi investment, there's an article, you know what I mean? It's like, I don't even know what their priorities are, because the money. What
an analogy.
You can find.
They are.
If
There's
you want
no
to find
different.
Saudis investing in some weird, obscure nano finger, nail polish, I bet you could find it.
The egg lobby is in bed with Saudi Arabia.
No, I'm sure
Saudi Arabia hired the egg lobby's firm to advise them on investments. So how did you get eggs in everybody's household? They're like, well, let me tell you. And they're like, great, we'll do the same thing, but with sports.
No, but they just, you Google anything, it loses meaning. You're like, I don't even know where they're investing. It's like, if you don't take a stand, if you stand for everything, you stand for nothing. It feels like that. I'm like, well, I guess we've got all the money in the world. You just go everywhere.
Well, that's it. And also the other thing too, and I hadn't really thought about this before, is another thing that's a huge driver of revenue and decisions in sports is sponsorship. Sponsorship. All these big sporting events, they don't want to lose their sponsors. But the more Saudi Arabia owns a lot of that stuff, a lot harder, those relationships are going to get a lot stronger with the big advertisers of the world. So it's going to make it harder for them to get canceled out of something, right? Like I give it, even a good example was Budweiser with the World Cup, right? It was like, how are you going to do that? You can't drink in Qatar. How's Budweiser going to sponsor the fucking World Cup? And Qatar was like, we will make an exception in the stadiums. You can drink Budweiser. And the day before the World Cup started, they're like, just kidding. You can't. And then Budweiser hauled in as much non-alcoholic beer as they could fucking find to drop into the World Cup and sell it. Yes. But you know what I mean? But because they said that, Budweiser would be like, fuck no, we're not. The FIFA would have lost all their money and be like, we're never sponsoring your bullshit again. You're not letting us drink our beer. We got British people coming, man.
Wait, so there wasn't beer? I mean, this shows you how out of this.
Beer.
Wait, but so how does so the point here being that clearly did not strengthen the relationship of Qatar and Budweiser, but presumably Saudi Arabia is not going, they're giving an exemption to Cristiano Ronaldo and his girlfriend. They have rules in Saudi Arabia. You can't live together unless you're married. So they've created an exemption so that Cristiano Ronaldo can live with his girlfriend with whom he has 7 children, right?
What was the joke that was he's so averse to he won't put a ring. He's so desperate to not put a ring on it that he'll make a country change its laws so that he doesn't have to.
And then get, that's funny.
Yeah, he'll even make Saudi Arabia change their laws so that he doesn't have to marry her, despite being together for 10 years and having 6 kids.
Right. That is the beginning of the end, though, right? Because you can't, as a nation. So is that your point? Let me start with this, and then I'll make my point. Is your point that you think Saudi Arabia is going to be like, yes, Budweiser, we allow you, and so it will strengthen the relationship?
Oh, I don't care about the Budweiser. I'm just saying they are just gaining power and influence everywhere they can.
Right. And but then you gave the Qatar example, and that to me is an example of almost isolating yourself against the world further, because now Budweiser doesn't like Qatar, because what the hell, you rug pulled us at the last minute.
It wasn't the relationship wasn't Budweiser and Qatar. The relationship was Budweiser and FIFA. So that kind of comes into play because you have the needs of 3 different entities there, and you have someone like Budweiser, who has paid an astronomical amount for a sponsorship, and FIFA that is desperate to hang on to that they will, through whatever backroom deals, be like, Qatar, you're going to have to let alcohol in here. And Qatar will say whatever the fuck they want. They can to make it happen. Qatar is not a Saudi Arabia. Keep that in mind, though. That's a very different situation. So I think what Saudi Arabia is doing is like, they'll never have a situation like that because they're already going to have so much influence and power over all of these sports companies. That they'll never run into. They want to do that so their cultural issues are never an issue. Let's say. Anyways, I don't think those points necessarily align, Carly. I was just making an example of like the kerfuffle of going to conservative countries when you are a global brand. Let's put it that way.
And I can't remember. I was going to make a point on the Saudi Arabia front, but I can't remember what it was anymore. I would like to go. I was invited to Riyadh and then like temporary. It was kind of a weird thing. It was kind of last minute. So I didn't go. And it was, we've got a war going on that feels like just.
You know what they have this summer, Carly? They have a $15 million esports tournament.
Wow.
Yes.
That wasn't.
So they're hosting an esports tournament.
You said that so maybe that's when you want to go, Carly. And I'm going to be honest. That is not the thing that's getting me out to Saudi Arabia. I was going to go for
Don't you want to go there in the summer when it's nice and hot?
Yeah, when you can really just like swelter.
Don't you want to go there at the worst time of year?
Yeah, the worst.
That's what I don't know. That's what they said online. That they're hosting a tournament. They want to get into esports, like everything they can. So
this is my point.
I don't know. Yeah.
It means nothing to me. I'm like that and everything else, apparently. Like if you Google literally anything and Saudi Arabia money, they touch. That should be the challenge. Find an industry in which any money is going, in which no Saudi money is going, and I will pay you $1.
Yeah. Challenge accepted. Yeah. NFTs. There was that Saudis collection a couple months ago. That's it. That's all we know about Saudi Arabia. We don't. Maybe they're the ones. Maybe they were the ones sweeping like checks today or something like that. Maybe that's them.
Well, I was talking to somebody today who's got a company that's in Web3 that is Saudis want to give them money. Literally today, I was having that conversation with. I'm not going to name them because I think they're very conflicted about whether or not they want to take the Saudi money. But in a certain kind of a bear market, it's like.
Would you? Okay, I asked some really weirdy questions. If it turned out tomorrow that part of A16Z's giant crypto fund was like $2 billion of that was from the Saudis, would it surprise you?
Probably not. I don't know. No, because I don't know enough about. I don't track that kind of a thing enough to. So no. Would it surprise you?
I don't know. I've never even thought of it. I've never even thought about where they get their $8 billion that they've invested in the space or whatever.
Right. Yeah, that's sort of my thing too. It's like where does A16Z? I kind of assumed it was like Mark's personal money and Horowitz's personal money and like from their own past crazy exits and then making that money through other venture and then that's what I assume.
I think, how about this? I think maybe to kind of just like wrap this Saudi thing up is that at some point in the next 10 years, when a major North American sports franchise goes up for sale, the Saudis are going to try and buy it. And that is going to be incredibly controversial because then they will have an actual footprint in the U.S. Yeah. Right. Versus now it's very on the outside. It's very like, oh, maybe like here's a golf competitor, but they don't actually like own outright own like a main thing. They also, they put a lot of money. They own like they've invested in like Blizzard and like other like American based companies. But the idea of like, hey, Mark Cuban is tired of having the Mavericks. He wants to sell it and he's selling it to, the prince from Saudi Arabia. Like that's going to be really interesting when we get there.
Well, this has been so fun and informative, and I'm.
We're only like halfway through the stuff we said we'd talk about.
Wait, are we really?
I don't know. No, we can wrap this up. We've had such a long talk.
Well, I guess where it's all
Scroll down the document. There's like a million more things.
I blacked it out. I was like, it has been a long ass week. I am not doing this whole document.
Hours.
Well, also, Barrett, for anybody who's listening just on the Overpriced JPEGs feed, again, we did 40 minutes before y'all joined us. If you want to hear, LG wanted to interview me a bit. I'm not subjecting the Overpriced JPEGs listeners to that. But if you want to hear LG interview me and hear me talk more, you can go over to the First Mint and listen to that episode.
If you guys want to know whether she would cancel her wedding for Taylor Swift, that's the 40 minutes you want to go listen to.
If you guys want to know the kind of hard-hitting questions that go asked on the sports NFT channel, the First Mint.
Would Carly let Tay prepare peanut butter and jam sandwiches for her wedding in exchange for her performance.
Yeah, if that's an answer you need, please go head over to First Mint and listen to this episode.
Exciting times of sports NFTs, man. We're talking about Tay-Tay.
Okay, you're right. We didn't get through all, but I actually think we did cover a lot of this sort of through osmosis, earlier in the episode. What we didn't talk about was kind of the loyalty program piece, but I actually think, I did an interview with Tariq Nazlawi recently, and we talked a lot about that. We didn't talk about the ticketing thing, but that's again something I actually think March, and nobody hold me to this because I can't guarantee it, but I think we might really do a bit of a focus on ticketing stuff in March across, music. Maybe we end up talking about sports a little bit, but I want to do a little Tay-Tay panel, with all the Ticketmaster stuff that's happening with her and where could NFTs fit into that. So
didn't Biden just pass a law yesterday?
There was a hearing
against a hearing. It was a hearing.
I don't think it was a law,
Ticketmaster fees.
But there was a hearing about what happened with Ticketmaster. And it was kind of funny. It's like, the one opportunity for like the left and right to really come together and just like all have their say about like how bad the monopoly is there.
Yeah, it really is. Okay, well, I'll just say one statement then for like the loyalty ticketing part.
Great.
Is that to me, the sports ticket and concert ticket hasn't changed in 100 years. It's been the same. Now there's a picture on it. When you get your ticket, you're going to Tay-Tay, you're going to the Knicks game. There's a photo of a person on it. That's nice.
Yes, it's the physical one. I just get the QR code on my email address.
You get the QR code. Yeah. And the QR code, but I'm saying the QR code makes it even less exciting.
That's what I'm saying. You know what I mean? Like, I don't ever even get the physical one. Like, you
don't even get the fun physical. But in the past, people have collected. People even like, I've known people who collect their boarding passes from planes. Yeah. And been like, look how many planes I went on this year for whatever reason. That's like a glamorous thing. But what I'm saying is I feel like the ticket is a golden opportunity. Yeah. I think a ticket is one of the most wonderful things you hold. And we've kind of lost that, unfortunately. It's like you book your ticket to freaking Coachella or some shit, and it comes in the mail in a beautiful box. And you're like, I can't wait. I have such an emotional experience even before you go to it. Then after it, you have it and you're like, it encapsulates that emotion more than a picture or anything ever could. And I think tickets are due for a revival in Web3. I think like I would love nothing more than to have a paper trail at every event that I've ever been to, not just some shitty QR code that's in my phone, but like in some kind of organized app or in some way that it doesn't have to give me all these benefits. It doesn't have to be this thing that keeps giving you new tickets, but just in a way that's meaningful, where I can get access to behind the scenes footage from the thing I was at or something. I would love that to then dovetail into a larger loyalty program. And this is now very sports specific. We still haven't really quantified fandom properly. Like if you and I are both fans of the Bills, or me versus Zach, or my brother versus Zach, two Bills fans, real Bills fans. Who do we know is the best one? We don't know. They go to games. They cry for 5 days when they lose. We know that. But that's not a real gauge. I want to know, how many hours of football have they watched of the Bills? How many games have they attended? How many times have they bought merch? How many POAPs have they collected from different events? How many times have they met the players? How can we track and tokenize all of that stuff as the ultimate flex of like, dude, let me show you my Bills freaking wallet, or some wallet is the term I'm going to stick with. But I think that's what like a wallet and tickets can evolve into, is this, along with Web3, into this incredible loyalty program. And to say some nice things about Dapper, like when you listen to Roham talk, that's what he talks about. He talks about Top Shot becoming the currency of fandom of the NBA and what that really means. And they have a partnership with Ticketmaster this year where 100 NFL games, you can get a ticket from it on Flow. They did a thing with the Trailblazers the other day where people going to the game would get an NFT. Like, it's starting. I think it's years away. I think we need a lot more imaginative builders to come in and start building those applications. But I think that's where like the sports experience is going into a far more formalized, tokenized version of what we have right now. Because right now there's no way to prove that you're a bigger sports fan than somebody else. But I think in the future there will be. I don't think it's going to be how many Top Shot moments you have. I think it's going to be like measuring all of that shit.
Right.
That's what I want. I don't know if that's where it's going to go. I don't know if that's a viable product. I don't know if you can make money on that. But that's where I think, as a fan of many different sports and teams, I would love for it to be something like that.
Well, and it's a little bit different in sports, right? Because you have this loyalty that you're born into. You inherited your sports fandom from your father, so there's a little bit, or your mother, or whoever. But like, you're not competing. These teams are not competing to attract a fan in the same way that businesses in the same industry are competing to attract each other's, customers. But I do think that, broadly, the reason I feel like this stuff is what's going to play out is because, capitalism, for all of its faults, is working and does work in such a way that the incentive is to continue to provide more and more value to the consumer. And that's where things get pushed. And so, I've talked about this a bunch when I talk about loyalty programs. So people might get sick of me hearing me say this, but like you started with, give me money, I give you product. And then we had these shop to earn things that came out where it's like buy 9 lattes and get the 10th one free. And now you see, again, continuing with the coffee analogy, Starbucks is sort of like, hey, play on our app and do this game and like click a couple buttons and like you can get a free latte. You don't have to spend money with us first, and
but you get the badges in the Starbucks app.
Right.
You
got to get the badges.
You can sell them, which is cool, but do you want to do that or do you want to keep them?
Well, and that's the point is like, that there's that kind of, there's sort of an upping the ante to create more and more value. So I feel like even if you can't make money on this directly as a sports league, which I'm sure they'll find a way to make it, right? You can at a minimum create that much more loyalty, engagement, time spent on your platform, which is what all these things want.
From a personal standpoint, Carly, I've had mixed relationships with sports through my life. Like the NFL, I really started to hate 10 years ago because of their scandals. Baseball, when I lived in a baseball city, I went out to all the games, but then after that, I didn't watch unless my team is doing well. NHL is in and out of my blood as a Canadian person. And NBA has really been my forte for the last 10 years. All of Web3, all of sports has brought me so much closer to every single one of those. Just through gamification, because I like gambling and I want to play, but also through like pretty pictures in the computer. You know what I mean? Like that, it means something to me to have these things, whether they're true or not, just the same way. And again, this is where kind of coming back to collecting a little bit more than gambling is like same way 30 years ago when you were a card collector or a POG collector or whatever, and you had your binder of all the things and you could flip and be like, I'm missing one. Like that I think is really deep. And I think that all of this has been able to enhance that. And I think that whether there's money there or not, I think that that's what's going to drive clicks. That's what's going to drive the engagement is having those check marks saying that it's like, yeah, you belong in that club of people that fucking love this thing. And I think that that's like the most important quality going forward for a lot of this stuff, outside of the financial trends.
And on that note, I think that was a pretty bow. I think we did wrap it with a bow.
Hello. Yes.
On that note, LG, thank you so much for doing this with me and with us. Everyone, thank you for listening. We will, I'm sure, do this again and more of it. And enjoy your week, folks. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Overpriced JPEGs. If you liked this conversation, if you liked this episode, please go ahead and hit subscribe. It helps me out, it helps the show out, and it means you will get alerts and updates when we post new content. Thanks again.